Hello. Hello, please. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Going feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. I just got in from cleaning the car when the phone rang. It was Mick being all weird and casual. He said he was having a few friends around for a drink that afternoon at Angels Green, and why didn't I pop over? Oh, and could I bring my fishing gear with me because he wanted to borrow it? So I gathered up my waders, a change of clothes and my passport and said goodbye to the wife. I knew we were on for another run. I drove over in my Scirocco, parked in the driveway and then walked up the path. Mick met me at the door and ushered me into the living room where I saw Jack Womes and Peter Corey already sitting down chatting. The other thing that caught my eye was this enormous pile of money on the coffee table. A pile so big that depending on where you sat, you couldn't actually see some of the other people around the table. But no one mentioned it. The others nodded hello and Mick told me to get myself a drink. I walked over to the fridge and got myself some beer, then came and sat with the others, so the pile was blocking out Corey. Then we all started talking about this and that until the conversation died down, and suddenly Mick grabbed a pile of money off the table and started flicking through it. And then Jack and Peter started doing the same. Then Mick said to me, "Don't just sit there like a prat, Darren, grab some money and start counting." It turned out it wasn't just one big pile after all. It was several smaller piles all gathered together. There was supposed to be 76,000 from Tate and friends, 28,000 from some friends of Mick's down south, 14,000 from Jack Womes, and Mick had put in a little bit himself to make up a total of £124,000. But nothing was taken on trust. We each had to count each person's money, then hand it on to someone else for check-in. I don't think anyone was particularly surprised when Pat's bundle turned out to be £200 short. Mick wrote a note to himself so he'd remember to subtract the difference from the amount of drugs he gave to Pat. Then we bundled all the cash into a bag so that Corey and I could get on our way. Although Corey hadn't put any money into the deal, Mick once again insisted on giving me the big speech about if there's any decisions to be made, Corey should make them because he was the experienced one. Then just like before, he gave me, rather than Corey, the radio. "What do you reckon the weather will be like for the crossing this time, Mick?" I asked. He shrugged. "Alright, I suppose. Certainly not as bad as the last time we came over." That wasn't what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear that it was going to be the worst crossing ever, that Corey was going to hate every minute of it. "Well," I said, "I'll keep my fingers crossed for the two of you." The plan this time was for Corey and I to take a ferry as a couple of foot passengers and then hire a car once we got to Amsterdam. Although there's no real border between Amsterdam and Belgium, Mick was always concerned that a British car driving between the two was far more likely to be stopped than a local one. As far as he was concerned, we'd been lucky up until then. But now he didn't want to take any extra chances, especially as he had gone over the magic £100,000 mark for the first time. On the way down to Harwich, in the light of what Mick had said, I made the decision that I was going to make a real effort to get on with Corey, but somehow he managed to start pissing me off almost straight away. When we got to the docks, he refused to buy the tickets because he didn't want to be seen by the cameras. Then he refused to carry the money through customs and insisted on walking through on his own 10 minutes after I'd gone through, just to be sure he could say he wasn't with me if it all came on top. But I suppose the thing that really got to me was the way he spent so much time bragging about what a big man he was and how so many people were scared of him. The truth was, he was a spineless twat with no bottle, and I was lumbered with him. We got a cabin on the boat, and I left Corey there to look after the money, while I went off to have a few drinks in the bar and then went to the casino. I lost a fair bit of money, but I didn't care. I stayed there for the rest of the trip just so I could avoid Corey. The next morning, paranoid Peter was living up to his name in full. He made sure that I carried the money through Dutch customs when we got off the ferry, and he stayed a little way behind me. Then he insisted that I book the train tickets in my name, and when the ticket inspector came along, he made sure it was me who had the money, just in case. But when we got within spitting distance of Stone's Caff, he had a sudden change of heart. "Give me the bag," he said. "Eh? What for?" "Look, don't fuck about. You know I'm in charge here. Just give me the fucking bag." I didn't have the energy to argue. I thought, sod it, if he wants to look like the big man as if he's been the one in charge of the money the whole time, then let him. This time, Harris was waiting for us along with one of his Dutch partners when we got to the caff. I'd seen this other guy hanging around before. He was the one who led me out of the city the first time when I bought the drugs from there. But this was the first time he'd actually been there while we were striking the deal. He didn't say anything the whole time, he just sat in the background making me nervous. We wanted grass, but Harris checked with his partner, then said there wasn't any around. That seemed fair enough. After all, the first time we'd gone over there he didn't have anything at all. So we settled for resin. We fixed the price and I checked the exchange rate on teletext. It worked out that we were getting the stuff for £1,125 per kilo, roughly half of what it would be worth once we got it back to Britain. It was pretty much then that the problems began. Corey started getting the money out, emptying his gear including his dry suit onto the floor, and Harris looked over and said, "Oh, what's that?" So as quick as a flash, I said it was a flying suit for the helicopter. Corey looked at me as if I was totally mad, like I'd lost the plot. "Don't be soft," he said. "It's my waterproof for the boat." He then looked at Harris and raised his eyes to the ceiling like I was some kind of moron. I was still trying to think on my feet, trying to save the day. "Yeah," I said, "but I only use the boat if they're having a problem with a helicopter, but it's fine today." Now, I'm no expert in the drug business, but one thing I do know is that you don't trust anybody, and you don't tell anybody any more than they need to know. It's just too big a risk. And telling your supplier just how you're getting the stuff out of the country is pretty fucking high up on the list of things not to do. But that's just what Corey had done, and to make it worse, Corey didn't even realise how daft he had been. That was the first hiccup. The deal was done, and the next step was to hire a car to drive to Belgium. Me, Dopey Harris and Corey took a cab over to Eurocar where I'd pre-booked a Toledo. I filled in the forms, smiled at the man behind the counter and handed over my credit card. He ran it through the machine, frowned and handed it back. It had been declined. The car company asked if I knew how much I had left on my limit, and I told them about £250. That turned out to be the problem. They used to charge only £200 deposit, but had had a spate of people hiring cars, then sodding off to Germany and selling them for a huge profit. Since then, they'd upped the amount of the deposit to £500. Harris was not impressed, and wasn't about to let me use his card, while Corey didn't have one, so we were buggered. In the end, we went back to the bar and I used Harris's payphone to call the TSB back in Braintree and ask if there was anything I could do. They said if I could get someone to pay in cash at my local branch, they would credit it on my card immediately. I got straight on the phone to Sandra, who then had to go rushing about like a blue-ass fly trying to borrow money off of people. Within about an hour she had got £300 together and paid it in, so the three of us got another cab back over to Eurocar. This time, Corey realised he'd left all the bags in the boot and ended up chasing this cab about half a mile down the road until it stopped at some traffic lights. I don't think Harris was particularly impressed at that either. He must have thought we were some kind of slapstick comedy duo trying out for Dutch television rather than a pair of serious drug smugglers, but I guess our money was as good as anyone else's. We finally got the car, drove back to Harris's and parked it in a road around the corner from the bar to wait for the drugs to arrive. About 10 minutes later, Harris and two cronies turned up carrying 5 cardboard boxes between them. I'd expected the drugs to have been packed in bags or wrapped in plastic. That's the way they'd always come the last couple of times. But Harris just mumbled something about not having any bags in stock and proceeded to dump the boxes in the boot. We didn't have time to argue. All the problems with hiring the car had put us well behind schedule, and I only had a couple of hours to get to Belgium. Once we got on the motorway, I just followed whichever car was going the fastest, and hoped that if anyone got stopped, it would be them and not me. The last thing I needed was another speeding ticket. We got to Blankenberg with a few minutes to spare, so I bought some bags from this supermarket across the harbour, and Corey and I started transferring the drugs over. In our rush to leave Amsterdam, I hadn't realised just how badly packed the drugs were. Even the individual blocks hadn't been wrapped up properly. The whole lot had just been thrown together. There was no way any of it was going to be waterproof. Then Corey and I had realised that we'd run out of bags and the shop we'd bought them from had shut for the evening. We ended up having to leave one load in the box. Not the best place to store something for a 70-mile trip across the sea, but we just didn't have any other choice. By the time we finished, it was almost a rendezvous time, and Corey started taking charge again. He insisted on doing things by the book, parking about 2 miles away and walking down to the beach to check the coast was clear, walking back to the car, then bringing it a little closer. I just looked at him and shook my head. I'd already spent 24 hours too long in his company and it was really starting to get to me. Whether he was in charge or not, I wasn't going to behave like a prat unless it was absolutely necessary. "Who the fuck do you think you are?" I said to him. "Secret squirrel? Look, we're parking here and that's it. If the coast isn't clear, we'll see it from the car and then we can drive away. If you don't like it, you can just fuck right off." That pissed him off something rotten. So after we put our waterproofs on and started taking the bags down to the beach, he stormed off in a huff, and in the wrong direction. I pointed out that he was at the first concrete pipe, and that the meeting place was at the second one. He looked at me with daggers in his eyes. Basically, he was so pissed off with me that he didn't want to agree about anything. If I told him his name was Peter, he'd have wanted to have a row about it. "No, it ain't. It's always the first one." I shook my head. "No, it isn't. The reason it isn't, moron, is because the first one you'd be too close to the pier." "Darren, I think you're forgetting who's in charge here." So I left it. By now Mick was 5 minutes late, and Corey was already in quarter panic mode. We were sitting in a sand dune on this little mound of grass surrounded by bags of puff, looking out over the water and listening to the radio for Mick to come in. But he didn't, and there was nothing we could do apart from wait. And wait. 15 minutes later and Corey was in half panic mode. I was starting to feel a bit uncomfortable myself. There were all these people taking their dogs out for a walk on the beach, passing within just a few yards of us each time. And as they passed us, their dogs were going absolutely mad for the drugs. I mean, these dogs were going crazy for the stuff, tearing at their leashes and barking like crazy. And all we could do was sit there in our waterproofs with these dodgy looking bags and pretend that we didn't know what was going on. And wait, and wait. Mick was now 25 minutes late, and Corey had missed out the interim stage and gone into full blind panic mode. He grabbed one of the bags, the lightest one, surprise surprise, and ran down to the water, desperately scanning the sea for any sign of Mick. Just then, the radio crackled into life. "Sparky, come in, Sparky." "Yeah, I'm here." "OK," said Mick, "flash your torch." I did, and he told me he couldn't see it. I flashed it again, but he still couldn't see it. "Where are you? I'm at the beach," he yelled. "I'm actually on the sand, where are you?" I grabbed the other bags and dragged them down to the beach, but still couldn't see Mick, let alone hear the boat. Corey was literally running around in circles and generally being useless, so I flashed the torch again. "I see you," said Mick. "You're in the wrong place. You're bloody miles away. What are you doing down there?" Mick had quite rightly parked at the second concrete pipe, so Corey and I had to drag all the drugs about 1/4 mile to where he was. There was no point in explaining. I knew that whatever I said, Corey had a good 4 hours to convince him that it was my fault, so I just pushed the boat back out to sea and waved him goodbye and good riddance. I thought I'd had more than enough excitement for one night, but unfortunately, it wasn't quite over yet. I'd parked the Toledo right next to this karate club, and when they saw some bloke in waders struggling to get into a car, my hands were freezing from the water and I couldn't work the lock properly, they thought I was a car thief. The next thing I know, there were 25 massive blokes in judo suits running towards me shouting out in French. I didn't have a clue what they were saying, but I decided I wasn't going to hang around to find out. I got in the car and watched them grow small in my rearview mirror. What a night. I drove back to Amsterdam and got totally lost trying to find the car hire place, so in the end I flagged down a cab and got him to drive there so I could follow him. After that I got the cab to take me to the Delta Hotel. It was too late to get a ferry back to England and I fancied a few beers anyway, so I spent the night in Stone's bar talking bollocks and drinking myself into a stupor. By the time I got back to the hotel, I was shattered. I slept like a baby. It might have been a bit of a nightmare, but at least nothing else could go wrong. You've been listening to Blogs 19, written by Tony Thompson. This book is available to purchase online at Amazon and other online book retailers. Many thanks for joining me for this video. Very shortly you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Take care. Cheers.